If you find yourself getting caught in push-pull dynamics in your relationships, where one partner is always chasing the other until the other turns around, starts giving a little bit back, and then all of a sudden they start chasing you, it's likely you may be struggling with insecure attachment styles in your relationships. Likewise, if you feel like you are always walking on eggshells around a partner, chasing them down even though they're being emotionally unavailable, it seems like everything is on their terms, and over time you start to feel like maybe you're just too needy, or maybe you're kind of a burden, and you start kind of bending yourself to fit and suit whatever you think they want, it's likely you're struggling with insecure attachment. Equally, if you find yourself attracting partners who are overgiving, who tend to kind of saturate you with your love, almost as if they are obligating you to give something back, and so you feel compelled to put distance between you and your partner, or you start to feel smothered, or you start to feel like, oh my gosh, they're just too good for me, I don't deserve this, I'm gonna disappoint them at some time, I might as well drop that shoe right now, then you may also be struggling with insecure attachment styles. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Brianna McWilliam, and I am an author, educator, and licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist. And I've been in the field for about 13 years now, and I am just wild about helping individuals with insecure attachment go from feeling lost and confused and fearful in their relationships to stepping into what I call their self-sovereignty, so they can call in those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want, without having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And I do this by applying a psycho-spiritual approach to creative arts interventions through the framework of attachment theory. And my method has 3 prominent steps: cognitive reframing, body activation, and arts-based experiential. So today, we want to step into a bit of cognitive reframing by going over the basics of attachment styles. And so I'm going to try to make this a brief overview of 4 attachment styles, 3 insecure attachment styles, as in comparison to a secure attachment style. So let's get started. Now, attachment styles are basically 4 unique blueprints for how you learned to give and receive love in childhood, and those blueprints follow us into our adult relationships. In fact, our adult relationships can also start to build on those love maps, okay? So we can either compound the lessons we've learned, or we can learn to dismantle those lessons and create new constructs for how we're going to engage in our relationships. Now, these blueprints or love maps also tend to be a good indicator of how we approach closeness or distance in our intimate relationships. So individuals that want a lot of closeness in relationships are what I call open hearts, and in the attachment literature, they may be referred to as having an anxious attachment style. Individuals who tend to want to put more distance between themselves and a partner, I call rolling stones, and they tend to be referred to as avoidant in the attachment literature. Now, you may have an attachment style where someone both wants closeness and distance, in the sense that they want that connection, they really want a deeply intimate relationship, but when it comes into their sphere, they also experience it as somewhat threatening. It makes them feel fearful to be that close to someone, and so they may try to shut down the relationship and then immediately put space between a partner after just beckoning them closer. So there's kind of a confused mixed signal going on there. For individuals like that, I call them spice of lifers. And in the literature, they may be referred to as having a disorganized attachment style, sometimes referred to as fearful avoidant. Now, lastly, we have cornerstones, and this is what is referred to as secure attachment in the attachment literature. So cornerstones are individuals that are equally comfortable with closeness and with distance. They are best capable of accomplishing what we might refer to as interdependence. So it is not the sort of codependency that we might associate with anxious attachment. It's not the anti-dependency that we might associate with the avoidant attachment style. And it isn't the sort of disorganized attachment push-pull back and forth of the spice of lifer. It's more that we can be separate, but together. And so this is what in the attachment literature we are encouraged to try to accomplish in order to have a sense of balance and harmony in our relationships. Now, sometimes these attachment styles are discussed and managed categorically like this, but it's important to realize that you may experience attitudes and or behaviors of an attachment style that feels at times maybe contrary to what you experience on a more regular basis. So for example, you may have an open heart who identifies the feelings of avoidance from time to time. You may have someone who is a rolling stone that identifies feelings of anxiety from time to time. So there is some overlap with these styles. They are not static. They are in fact dimensional states of being. And I think it's really important for you to understand that we experience this push-pull, this desire for closeness while at the same time needing space on a continuum. So I wanted to share with you this little diagram here, if you can see that there. So basically you want to think of it as like an XY axis. So you have anxiety, so we have low anxiety to high anxiety, and then you would have low avoidance to high avoidance. Now I've labeled the different attachment styles in these quadrants here, so you might have Cornerstone attachment, again, low anxiety, low avoidance. If you have an open-hearted attachment style, you would have higher anxiety and low avoidance. If you are a spice of lifer, you'd have high anxiety and high avoidance. And if you are a rolling stone, you would have not a lot of anxiety, but higher avoidance, okay? But what I would emphasize and what I really want you to notice here is that there's a lot of space. There's a lot of area to move around in here, right? And you might move around based on your context, if you had a major loss in your life or a life-changing event, some kind of catalytic event. You might also be affected by the attachment style of your partner, because one of the things that we get caught in with these attachment styles is what I call the anxious avoidant trap. And so your partner is going to say and do things that trigger you in one direction or another. So you may be responding to your attachment figures and discovering that your attachment style may move along these different spectrums and in these different quadrants, okay? So I really want to emphasize that these are dimensional states of being. You're not just lumped into one category and you have to be stuck there forever. Now that said, it can be very beneficial to draw lines around different types of behaviors, thoughts, and attitudes and the frequency with which you experience and express them, because that allows us to start to outline what our boundaries may be. And our boundaries are what allow us to show up most honestly and authentically in our relationships, because that increases our sense of self-awareness. It lets us know what is me and what is you. And once we have a better sense of that, we can start to negotiate the different intricacies of our relationships in a much more mature and sophisticated way. So basically what I would like to do for the rest of this video is just give you some bulleted behaviors and attitudes and expressions of these different types of attachment styles that would land you more frequently, let's say, in one of these quadrants or another, okay? So first I want to talk about open hearts, which is referred to as the anxious attachment style. Now, open hearts tend to give a lot in their relationships and they fall into people-pleasing mode. They may be accustomed to feeling a lack of love in their relationships and they tend to wait around too long for the reciprocation of loving feelings. They take on more than the lion's share of blame, fault, or responsibility in a relationship and for making it work, because on some level they feel like if they can be responsible for that, then it is within their control to fix it. They may struggle with critically low self-esteem and with worthiness issues. Deep down, they feel like they need to earn love, and so they're drawn to partners that are emotionally unavailable or challenging or edgy. If they encounter a partner who is too nice or too good or too easy in giving their love to them, they may view them as boring and or not enough of a challenge. Sometimes the over-helpfulness or the over-generosity comes from a place of, if they need me, they won't leave me. But this generosity becomes a double-edged sword, because inevitably they start to wonder, do they really love me for me, or do they love me for what I give them? They tend to get lost in the potential of a relationship as opposed to the real lived experience of the relationship. They may also fall into different types of addictions, whether it is ingestive addictions or non-ingestive addictions, like hoarding, shopping addictions, food addictions, gaming addictions, and so on. But really the hardest thing for anxious open hearts is they tend to be attracted to other people who also have insecure attachment styles. And often they fall into what's called the anxious avoidant trap. So they tend to be attracted to either rolling stones or spice of lifers who have an element of avoidance to them. And so as a result, they are perpetually triggering one another in a push-pull dynamic. Usually this lands the open heart in a relationship with someone that to them appears emotionally unavailable. And so this proves their deepest fear, which is that they are unlovable. Now, if you are someone who winds up feeling kind of bored, smothered, and or worrying about hurting your partner just when things start to be getting good, then you're probably falling into an avoidant attachment style, which I refer to as a rolling stone. You may have fears of hurting or disappointing your partner, but also at the same time feeling kind of smothered and obligated by them and to them. And so when you have a partner that expresses a need or demands something of you, you experience them as too demanding, as too needy, as burdensome, and you feel like they're trying to obligate you to something, which makes you really sensitive to even benign requests. You might also view generosity as a form of manipulation. You anticipate being blamed for things when they go wrong in the relationship, and so you kind of head that off by avoiding commitment or taking on too much responsibility. This may lead you to being described as having a fear of commitment, but it's actually because you take commitment quite seriously when and if you do finally decide to commit to something. You might be described as aloof or emotionally distant and unavailable, but when you do feel things, you might feel them very deeply and very intensely. Still waters run deep. Although you may not be able to articulate those feelings very well. And so sometimes it might scare you, and as a result, you shut them down, but it's not that they aren't there. Now, if you experience avoidance in the extreme, you may experience the anxiety when those feelings try to come up, but you shut them down right away because you don't have a sense of command around them. And so it's much better to keep them locked away. Now, you may struggle with fears of failure and a powerful streak of perfectionism, and you don't want to appear too weak or too vulnerable. So you tend to gloss over those things by either appearing as if you don't care or lazy or apathetic, or you work double time, overtime to make sure that you succeed at something. Like the open heart, deep down, you also believe that love has to be earned. And so equally, you are attracted to partners that present some kind of a challenge to you or that you feel are edgy. And this is usually what attracts you to the open heart because they are so emotionally expressive and effusive. And because that's something you don't often allow yourself, you find it very stimulating and intriguing. And so that feels challenging for you. Similarly, if a partner gives you their affection too easily, you also feel like they're too boring or they're too nice for you. Now, often rolling stones, like the open heart, can fall into relationships very quickly and also experience that push-pull dynamic. And usually between 3 to 5 months, something happens and the relationship kind of explodes or implodes. It's almost as if a switch flips for you and all of a sudden you start to feel overwhelmed, smothered, or like you need to escape. You start thinking about all your missed opportunities out there and your personal freedom begins to feel encroached upon. If your partner flirts with somebody else, you might actually feel a sense of relief followed by a need to test them. You also may struggle with various forms of addiction, whether they are ingestive or non-ingestive. And for the rolling stone, similar to the open heart, you also tend to attract individuals with insecure attachment styles. So you are attracting individuals that are perpetually triggering you in a push-pull dynamic. And usually this means you are attracting someone that has an open-hearted attachment style or a spice of lifer who leans towards more anxious tendencies. And so you attract partners that basically depend upon you for their emotional happiness. And that proves your deepest fear, which is that love and intimacy come at the cost of personal freedom. Now, if you feel you may express dimensions of both the open-hearted attachment style and the rolling stones attachment style, then it's likely you may be struggling with spice of life attachment style. Now, spice of lifers will express both ends of this spectrum, but they usually express both ends simultaneously and in the extreme. So their experience is such that it is qualitatively different than if you frequently fall into one of those quadrants or not. So remember, we're going back to our dimensional scale here. So the spice of lifer would be hanging out with high avoidance and high anxiety, but remember, it's moving around a lot. Right? And so what lands you in one quadrant or another is going to depend upon the frequency and the intensity with which you experience certain behaviors and attitudes such that we're describing here. So for the spice of lifer, I just want to give you a few bullet points on how that may be qualitatively different. So spice of lifers may behave in frightening or very frightened ways in situations that involve conflict. And that could include demonstrating hostile or aggressive behaviors. They may also demonstrate unpredictable behaviors and seem to be kind of erratic or confused or panicked, and there's no apparent trigger for it. They usually have a great amount of difficulty making sense of their experiences, and so it's difficult for them to provide a coherent narrative of what it is that they may be going through. If they've suffered abuse, that could lead to unusual or illogical or perhaps even irrational explanations for an abuser's behavior. If they are asked to relay the details of their experiences of childhood, the stories are usually fragmented and don't really make much sense. They struggle with an ability to self-soothe, and then they also have difficulty allowing others to help co-regulate their emotions, which is to say, they struggle soothing themselves and they struggle with receiving soothing from someone else. They're usually pretty negative and cynical about the possibilities for love. And when in conflict, they tend to vilify their partners and believe that their partner has some kind of malicious intent towards them and/or just wants to use them in some fashion. They tend to be prone to black and white thinking, and they can't hold ambiguous feelings very long without needing to take some kind of action to relieve that feeling. And that could look like acting out in a variety of ways. So it could be addictions, it could be sexual infidelity, it could be ending a relationship on a whim and then feeling terrible about it and coming back on your knees begging to get that person back. They may tend to overgeneralize very minor issues, and so they assume that some small disagreement in the relationship or even a contrast may mean that the whole relationship is just doomed. They may receive a partner's assertion of personal boundaries as a criticism or as a threat of abandonment, and so they may respond to a partner's assertion of their boundaries with criticism or with emotional withdrawal as a way to try to get their partner to abandon their boundaries because they view it as a threat to the relationship as a whole. But again, the hardest thing for a spice of lifer is usually that they are also attracted to individuals who have insecure attachment styles. And so they too can fall into the anxious avoidant trap, particularly because they express both ends of that spectrum. And so whomever they attract into a relationship, they typically end up triggering one another perpetually. And that is because the spice of lifer tends to experience their attachment relationships as both the source of comfort while simultaneously at the same time a source of threat. And so it feels like there's no way to really relax into the relationship easefully. And there's no way to really experience and perceive the contrasts that you might have in the context of romantic intimacy as an opportunity to deepen that intimacy. Because you perceive any contrast or boundary or difference between you as a threat to the relationship. And so as a result, there's always a form of self-abandonment going on. And when you are constantly abandoning yourself, you cannot show up authentically. And so the intimacy sort of remains in a stagnant place of stasis. And that stasis usually looks like stable instability. And because it's nearly impossible for a healthy relationship to evolve out of that kind of stable instability, the spice of lifer feels that their fears are always being proven. And that is that relationships are primarily about control and power dynamics. And at the basis of it, they are unworthy and undeserving of love. Now, in contrast to these three insecure attachment styles that we have examined, we're going to talk about secure attachment next. And this is what I refer to as a cornerstone attachment style. So cornerstones are generally comfortable with intimacy in relationships. They assume that their partners mean well and have positive intentions towards them. So they are usually quick to forgive in a conflict or in an argument. And they're not as rattled when their partner makes a mistake. A cornerstone may still ask for space, but they will let you know how much space they need and when you can expect to hear from them again. A cornerstone may also raise their voice when they're feeling anxious, but they won't attack your character or try to denigrate you to get you to do what they want you to do. Even in the heat of the moment, a cornerstone will make a bid to connect with you emotionally and intimately. This might look like cracking a joke or referencing a shared experience or reaching out to connect with you physically to try to confirm the establishment of the attachment relationship even if you are in a moment of conflict. Sex is usually intimate with a cornerstone because they don't have a need to split sex from emotional intimacy. So they don't need sex to just be sex and emotional intimacy to be something separate from sex. They can experience them together and in fact prefer it that way. They also feel secure and well seated in their own power to make changes in a relationship if they feel they need to be made. And they're not afraid to compromise because they don't view compromise as a complete abandonment of self. Just because I compromise once doesn't mean I'm gonna compromise every single time, right? And it doesn't mean I'm gonna allow myself to be snowed over for the rest of this relationship. When single, they believe that there is plenty of time and opportunity to find love out there. They are open to romantic relationships, but they also don't desperately need and or reject them. They're not typically jealous, and they do trust a partner will voice a problem they are having when they are having it. They're also open, receptive, and curious about their partner's needs and would like to play a role in satisfying them. Now that is different than taking on full responsibility for their partner's happiness, though they do and would like to play a role in that happiness. And they also tend to be friends with their exes. Why not? They were someone that they liked, that they had a good connection with. There was a lot of respect there. Maybe the romantic piece didn't work out, but that doesn't mean that you can't still appreciate that person for who they are. And so cornerstones typically find themselves attracted to other cornerstones. If they are in a relationship where someone is perpetually playing games, triggering them, testing them, not showing up, they tend to have a much lower threshold for putting up with that in a relationship. Now, it doesn't mean that cornerstones can't fall into relationships with insecurely attached individuals. And this isn't a good or bad thing. And it could be something that's very enlivening, But for cornerstones, they have to be particularly careful about being aware of when they are starting to sway towards the insecure dynamic of someone who's an open heart rolling stone or spice of lifer, so that they can hold their center, because truly, if they can hold that secure, let's say vibe, then the likelihood is more so that their partner will begin to move towards them in a more secure fashion. So that is an overview of the 4 attachment styles as I discuss them here on my channel. And if you're interested in learning more about them, diving much more in depth into what are the different facets and dynamics of each attachment style, what attachment style do I have, I invite you to check out the caption of this video where I have a little quiz that you can take to determine your own attachment style. And I've also included links to my 101 courses on these different attachment styles. So I invite you to check those out. If you like this content, make sure that you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more like it. And hopefully I will be seeing you inside my online community.